In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Please be seated. Good morning, everybody. Oh, it is those little things. It's those little things that get in the way of the big things, the most important things. And that's what's going on in this morning's gospel lesson. These religious leaders can't even begin to see the big thing standing right in front of them, standing right there in front of them in the life of Jesus. They are so caught up in their little things. They're so caught up in their small-mindedness. They are so caught up in the traditions of the elders that they can't even begin to see the new thing that God's doing right there in front of them. You can imagine how frustrated Jesus is in this moment. He is so aware of what his disciples have done for him. They have given up so much. They have sacrificed so much to follow him. They walked away from their families, from their livings. Again, they've devoted everything to his life and the course of his ministry. And then suddenly to have these religious leaders pick at them about not washing their hands before eating. A reasonable thing to do, right? So it is a reasonable thing to do, but to elevate it to a place of such great importance, to take something so really small in the greater scheme of things and make it seem so much bigger for Jesus is just so, in that moment, it is just so painful for him to hear. And he goes back to Isaiah. He borrows a verse from Isaiah, and you people honor me with your lips, but your hearts are so very far. You're so very far from me. You're so eat up with the small stuff that you can't even see the blessing that's standing right in front of you. The more I thought about this week, I kept thinking about our prayer book and even our own experience, because the religious leaders are talking about really ritualistic experiences. They're talking about how God gave them some initial commandments, and then throughout the story of the elders and the tradition, those commandments grew into an obscene number of rules and ordinances. And I was thinking back on our experience of even our prayer book. Speaking of ritual, here is our prayer book. What great and wonderful gift to us, hasn't it been? I mean, it came along almost, it's hard to believe it's been almost 500 years ago that the prayer book, born out of the Church of England, our Anglican experience, this Book of Common Prayer came out almost like around 1549, 50, the first one. And I kept thinking this week about how many times the prayer book has been revised. This wonderful symbol of common life and ministry and common hope. And how many times we have gathered around this book to sort of bathe in our common hope of making a connection with the sacred, of making a connection with God. And yet how many times over the past 500 years, as we have entertained any number of prayer book revisions, the changing of language at any number of turns and corners, how many times have we allowed ourselves to get caught up in it's an important questions, but the lesser, they're not as important. They're not as important as the main thing, which is what we find in common prayer and common worship, a common life and common hope, common dreams. And yet we allow ourselves in those moments of bickering and wrestling over language within the prayer book. We've allowed ourselves to beat up on each other and even separate and divide over questions of what should be in the prayer book. It's so typical of us, isn't it? I mean, it really is so typical of us, of how we let those smaller things, important but smaller things, to get in we almost raise them up to a place of dysfunction and idolatry. I remember Urban T. Holmes was an Anglican theologian who many years ago was wrestling with his own sort of connection with the tradition of the church. His life was rooted in our tradition as Anglicans, and he was a defender of the faith. And I remember him writing about his own struggle with that. And at some point he came out and said, I think I'm not in a healthy place about this. He says, I think I'm holding the tradition too tightly. He said, this prayer book and everything that we have, it's a gift to us to help us in our common life and ministry and service. But we cannot allow it to hold us. And we certainly cannot hold it so tightly that it really does become a source of pain and struggle and division. We hold it in ways that are terribly self-serving sometimes. And we forget that it is symbolic of common life and ministry. He said to us, hold the traditions lightly. Let them inform your faith, but don't allow your faith to be hijacked by these things that you raise up to a place of idolatrous importance. So I was thinking about all these things. It's not just in the church, by the way. Aren't you thinking about your own life at home and at work? About how we do the very same? It's not just here. It's everywhere we are. We get caught up in the small stuff. We allow all the little things we elevate them to a place of importance that is dysfunctional. And we miss out on the gift standing right in front of us. The gift of life and love with each other, relationship with each other. A common goal and a common work. We lose sight of the big thing because we get so caught up in the petty and the trite. We do it all the time. We do it every day. Terribly frustrating and so damaging to our common life and the love that we share with each other. So I was thinking about all these things, and then I was right back in Gulliver's Travels this past week, right? You were thinking the same thing, weren't you? You were right back. Jonathan Swift in the 18th century, right? Jonathan Swift, 18th century, wrote Gulliver's Travels. And we went with Gulliver to Lilliput, right? This past week. At least I did. My kids say I go to strange places, and I do. But I was right back in that struggle captured by Swift in the 18th century. It really is, by the way, it was a political satire. This writing was a political satire that was really addressing the very thing I'm talking about. He was so frustrated watching the Protestants and the Catholics, the Protestants in England and the Catholics in France, and watching these two countries beat up each other. Beat up each other over things trivial. And as a result, they weren't willing to surrender anything or give a bit for the common good so that they both could experience free trade and could both countries find enhancement and enrichment of life. They couldn't do it. And that's where the story comes from. Gulliver's Travels to Lilliput. His experience there with the Lilliputians and this morning I had someone, I was trying to come up with the name of that other party there that was fighting over what is the best way to break into or crack a boiled egg. That, by the way, that's a major theme in Gulliver's Travels. That's a major theme is the egg ordeal. You remember that? You don't remember it? Okay, great. Where have you people been? What do you spend your time doing? So anyway, Swift tells this story of Gulliver, and he goes to Lilliput, and the next thing you know, we've got the Little Enders, the Lilliputians, who are doing battle with and this morning at 7:45, I had someone correct me. I said the Befuscans, who were the other party, and this person yelled from the congregation some other name, and I knew that wasn't right, but I decided not to get caught up in little things in that moment. But the Lilliputians and the Befuscans were arguing and fighting over the question of what is the best way to break into this hard-boiled egg. The Lilliputians said you break in from the little end. The Befuscans said you break in from the big end, and there were the little enders and the big enders, they were called. And before you know it, they were skirmishing, and then there was this great tension, and then they were warring, and then they were destroyed. destroyed each other. And I thought to myself, that's us. That didn't just go on that didn't just happen back in the 18th century. What a great satire on what's happening in our own country today. Is it any more, have you ever seen anything more pathetic? It is pathetic. There is no sense of common good. There's no willingness to budge or surrender a bit for the sake of something greater. There's no capacity to move toward the other and think for a moment that perhaps I don't have to have my own way on everything. Maybe compromise would be good for the greater purpose and order of things. No, we dig in our small-mindedness, our narrow-mindedness. We dig into our small political rhetoric. And we hold on to that. We raise that up to a place of dysfunction and even idolatry. And we wonder what's wrong. We are so lost and confused in this. It's all about money. It's hard for people to budge when there's so much money behind the position. And the question is, how long before enough people will begin to scream out, enough of the madness? Enough of the madness. Lord, help us not get so caught up in the little things. Maybe not so little. Sometimes they're very important, but they are not as important as what we have to find together. Never as important. And it's the same at home. It's not just here. It's at home. It's at work. It's not just in our country. And the sort of the culture in our country today, which is so sick. It's in us at every turn, and you and I have to work really hard to kind of move out of this place of pettiness, trivial life and living where we allow the little things to consume us and take us over and hijack our dispositions and attitudes and the spirit that we bring into each day. Our capacity to compromise and to move toward the other for the sake of something greater. It's the answer to everything. It is the answer to everything. Jesus summed it up when he said, it's pretty simple. I need you to love God and love each other. That's what Jesus said. I need you to love God and love each other. And then this morning we've got these Pharisees worried about the washing of pots and pans. It is our condition. It is our struggle for life. We get caught up in the very same. We will do it again today when we go home, this afternoon at home. We will get caught up in the pots and pans, and we will fail to see the beauty and the wonder and the mystery and the gift of life that's standing right there in front of us. We will be unwilling to lose, to compromise for the sake of something greater. And the whole household will begin to lose and fail. Find courage in your Lord this day to stand in a new way, a different way. Find a new disposition. See the world from a new angle, a new perspective that will set you free from the pettiness. Begin to see the largeness of His presence and the largeness of His expectation and our own capacity for life and love. Dig in and do battle, but do it for something noble, not something pitiful and pathetic. May this day your lips, what comes out of your mouth, may it be consistent with a heart that is on fire for the love of God and for nothing else. And if you do that, you will love your spouse, you will love your children, you will love your friends in ways that are extraordinary. Amen.